Hello and welcome back to lesson number 5 of Baking School with Jami. Today we are talking all about muffins. Muffins are the quintessential quick bread recipe. But you know what? Up until a couple of years ago, I had never made homemade muffins in my life. They just seemed, muffins are great. You think of muffins from the store or a bakery, they're great, but they're very much kind of a desserty thing. We think of a lot of sugar, we think of a lot of white flour, and those can be really fun to make. But I just didn't see how they could be helpful in my daily cooking routine with my kids, trying to keep people full, right? But then I got my own grain mill. I started grinding my own grains fresh, and I realized how simple and easy muffins could be to make, how nutritious and packed they could be as a quick snack, and how delicious homemade muffins can be. And my kitchen changed forever because now I easily make 4 to 6 dozen muffins a week. Now that might seem crazy, but I do have 7 children, 6 of whom are boys, so we do go through a lot of food in this household. But because you can easily make a batch of 24 highly nutritious and delicious muffins in like under 10 minutes, why not make these and go all into it? So if you've never made homemade muffins before, this lesson and this recipe is gonna change your kitchen. Now, as a reminder, before we get into the good stuff, you can head over to bakingschoolwithjami.com to access all the printables and recipes for free that go along with each and every lesson. Every lesson, we're going to come up with a fantastic, simple recipe for you to do right alongside me. So watch until the end of this lesson today, because we're going to learn how to make a basic muffin recipe that you can add whatever you want into it. Take that one basic muffin recipe and you can make 20 different kinds of muffins that taste so different. I'm not making the same 6 dozen muffins every single week, every single day. We're making them and they feel so different in taste and texture, and yet they're all coming from that same base recipe. And then don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode of Baking School with Jami. All right, so I titled this episode Muffins for Every Meal because muffins are so versatile. So what you can do is you can start with our basic muffin recipe that we're gonna bake together today, and then you can add in everything you want, from pumpkin to chocolate chips, to blueberries, to raisins, poppy seeds, cinnamon, and so much more. And when you make lots of different combinations, you can make these recipes and these muffins taste so different. You can even make savory muffins with herbs, cheese, and even bacon added in. I love making savory muffins because we love adding in really good, healthy, nutritious bread with our dinners, with soups and stews, especially to keep these children full and happy without breaking the bank. And yet breads, if you didn't make them ahead of time, they can take a long time. They can take a couple of hours start to finish. Well, muffins, you forgot to make something, you can make some savory herb and cheese muffins, have them done, complete on the table within 20 minutes. So that's why I say muffins are for every meal, because you can have so much fun with them. And whatever you're adding into your muffin recipe, the rule of thumb is to add in 1 cup of additions per 12 dozen muffins. So if you're gonna do cherry chocolate chip, you're gonna add in half a cup of cherries, half a cup of chocolate chip per dozen muffins. So it makes it really easy. If you just want to come up with some fun experiments, try some different things, that is a good rule of thumb for you. All right, so we're gonna cover, before we get to making these muffins, we're gonna cover some different tips for making your quick bread muffins. The first tip is if you are making muffins and you're not getting a good rise on your muffins, they're not getting all nice and big, one tip that you can try is try increasing your oven temperature. So a higher oven temperature can get a better rise on those muffins. The standard muffin recipe, you're gonna shoot for about 375 to 400 degrees on your oven, whereas many loaf breads are gonna cook more at around 350 degrees. So if you're baking muffins at 350 and they're not rising well enough, go ahead and try upping that oven temperature. You might get a much better rise on that. Tip number 2, when making quick breads, you wanna make sure that you don't over mix your muffins. Or your batter. So we've talked about this in a previous lesson. Over mixing can damage the quick bread. And so most recipes, most quick bread recipes, most muffin recipes will indicate to mix until just combined. So you don't want to keep mixing and mixing and mixing. However, it is important to note that this only applies once you've added your flour to your bowl. So at the beginning, especially with muffin recipes, you are usually creaming or mixing together eggs, oil, your sugar, whatever sweetener you're using, and you want to thoroughly mix these together. You can even use a stand mixer or a handheld mixer to really beat those together. You want them to really mix together those liquids at this point to get them to emulsify. So we're not just doing a quick tiny mix. No, we really want to beat these together. In fact, some muffin recipes will have you cream at that point for even like 3 to 4 minutes. So at that point, we're not concerned about over mixing. We actually really want to mix those liquids together so that they emulsify properly. But then once you add in your flour, you want to just gently mix until it's all combined. So take a wooden spoon and just gently mix at that point, or a silicone spatula, get them just mixed and then stop, you're good. And this is where it's different than yeast breads, where you're gonna knead it for 3 to 5 minutes once the flour is added because you want that gluten development. So that's a really big difference. And so you don't wanna overmix quick breads, but at the same time, you wanna make sure that at the liquid stage, you're really getting it mixed together very well. All right, tip number 3, to make this basic muffin recipe gluten-free, you can just use Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 gluten-free flour. So you can get it on Amazon, some Costco's sell it, you can get it from Azure Standard, and Bob's Red Mill is a fantastic mix because like the title says, it's a 1-to-1 gluten-free mix. So you can take it cup for cup. So if a recipe calls for 1.5 cups of flour, you can use 1.5 cups of Bob's Red Mill. So when you're trying to do more gluten-free dishes, this can be an excellent first step in learning how to do it. And then for most muffin recipes, you can also try this hack. You can use half oat flour. Just make sure that you're looking for an actual gluten-free oat flour, which means that it wasn't in oats are naturally gluten-free, but a lot of oats are processed in a facility that comes in contact with gluten. So you wanna make sure that you're getting a gluten-free oat flour, especially if you're celiac and can't even handle like traces of gluten. For a lot of other people, that the traces there aren't going to bother them, but make sure you're getting an actual gluten-free oat flour, and you're gonna use half oat flour and half sorghum flour. And you can use that then in place of regular flour. So if the recipe calls for 2.5 cups of regular flour, you'll use 1 1/4 cup of oat and 1 1/4 cup of that sorghum, however you pronounce it, S-O-R-G-H-U-M. I'm probably butchering it, but you're gonna use half and half. Now you might need to add an additional about 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup of the flour if it is coming out too wet, which sometimes can happen. Just sprinkle in a little bit more flour till you get more of kind of that batter consistency. So you might need to play with it a little bit, but those are some really excellent substitutes if you're wanting to do gluten-free muffins, and they usually turn out really good. All right, my tips then for storing muffins. I am very, very simple. I just use a gallon Ziploc bag and store them in the fridge. So muffins, quick breads in particular, can get really mushy if left out at room temperature, whereas yeast breads, you actually don't want to store your yeast breads in the fridge because it will dry them out quicker. But with quick breads, they're often already, we're usually aiming for really moist, delicious muffins. You let them sit out on the counter, they're going to sweat, they're gonna mold very, very quickly if you live in a more humid environment. We used to live in California where it's very dry, and moving to Oklahoma, you can't leave things out. It's a big difference in humidity levels. And so I just store all of my muffins in the fridge. So just throw them in that gallon Ziploc bag, put them in the fridge. You can store them in Tupperware. Anything that's gonna be sealed, put them in the fridge. You can also easily freeze them for later, and muffins will freeze well for about 3 months. So that is a fantastic way. You can make up 2 dozen muffins and freeze half of them. I always make 2 dozen muffins at once because you're just making that same recipe in that same bowl, and you're just doubling the recipe. So our family of 9 easily can shoot through 2 dozen muffins. When a dozen muffins comes out of the oven hot, our kids can polish those off easily, a dozen muffins at once. But even for a smaller family, your time is almost identical, and then you can freeze half for later. So my personal suggestion is for your time, always make 2 dozen muffins at once. They'll store in your fridge for a good week. You can eat off of them all week, or store half of them in the freezer for later, and you're just really getting a good bang for your buck with your time. All right, my next tip is to let the muffins sit in the tins for about 5 to 10 minutes to start to cool. When they're sitting in the muffin tins, they're gonna start to sweat, and they're gonna start to naturally kind of release from the tin, which is gonna make them pull out of the tin easier. After the 5 to 10 minutes, you can transfer them to a cooling rack or the counter to cool completely. Make sure you cool them completely before putting in the fridge or the freezer. All right, so today we're gonna make a muffin recipe that you can use to make so many different kinds of muffins. Like, this is like a base blank recipe. You can add different things in. So I'm gonna give you the base recipe, but today I'm gonna be making apple cinnamon muffins. These are one of our favorites. We're heading into fall right now as I'm filming this, so like I am all about the apple cinnamon at this point. But if you head to bakingschoolwithjami.com, you can download the recipe for today's muffins, and then I've got all the different ideas for you there to change these up. So I mean, you're gonna get a good like 10 different muffins you can make right away. Cherry chocolate chip, maple walnut, peanut butter chocolate chip, and so many more. Okay, and then I did just want to, before we get to the recipe, I want to give one little plug. This is my cookbook, volume 1. If you go to the description, you can find the link to it. And in this cookbook, I am such a muffin nut, if you can tell. I have an entire section here. First section is on muffins, because muffins make an absolutely incredible breakfast, snack, an item with your lunch, things on the go. So I have a good dozen recipes in here. I've got savory muffins. We've got lemon poppy seed, almond cherry muffins. We have so many different ones. We have baked oatmeal muffin cups. We have so many different ones in here that are going to be just amazing. So many different muffin recipes. So if you fall in love with making muffins, my cookbook gives you all kinds of suggestions and recipes for other ones. Plus, I use a bunch of different kinds of flour for my muffins, which is really fun. So in today's recipe, I'm going to be making spelt muffins and also white flour muffins so that you can see the difference. All right, now stick around for a few more minutes while we make those muffins, and then head over to bakingschoolwithjami.com to download the printable sheet from today's lesson and to download the recipes for free. Don't forget to hit like on this video and subscribe so you never miss a future episode of Baking School with Jami, which we're gonna get in future courses. We're gonna do sourdough and yeast spreads and get into it all. But for now, let's go ahead and start making some muffins. Today we're making the best muffin base that you can then add in lots of different additions. Make sure you look at the recipe download for all of the ideas. I'm going to make spelt, which I was just grinding, and also a white flour, just all-purpose recipe. I'm gonna bake them side by side so you can see the difference. First thing we're gonna do is preheat that oven to 400, get that preheating. We're gonna mix together our dry ingredients. You can see I've got 2 different batches going on. If you wanna make 2 dozen, just do them all in one bowl. If you wanna do 2 dozen of the same. All right, so we're gonna do our liquid ingredients then in a separate bowl. I'm making my own homemade buttermilk here because I don't have any buttermilk on hand. That's a great little hack. Doing 1 cup for each, stirring the wet ingredients up, adding them into the dry. This is where you don't want to overmix, so mix till just combined. And then for this recipe, we're shredding up a bunch of apples. A Granny Smith apple is gonna work better, but these are the apples that I had on hand. So I'm just shredding them with our cheese shredder, throwing them in, and then making my own little cinnamon sugar mix. For the spelt muffins, I'm did sucanant and cinnamon. And then we're just gonna mix those up and scoop them into your bowls. You can see we've got our dozen muffins then. And then they're going in my very dirty oven that needs cleaning, as always. And we're gonna pull them out, and we have amazing and delicious apple cinnamon muffins. And you can make these just kind of however you want.